Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, the second hour on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you today. I want you to meet my morning stars, the Santita Jackson Morning Stars, on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. The conversation is great. You want to be a part of the family there. And then my family has expanded. I want you to go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. Please meet me there. And please link up with me on Twitter at Santita J, at Santita J. And let us connect. Let us connect. I'm working on connecting more frequently with everybody. So please stay tuned right here on AM 950 Radio. You can also stream us if you just want the audio portion on am950radio.com. And check us out. Everybody, in the second hour, as we are looking at this election season, so much. Last year, we thought maybe COVID would be at the center of the election. And maybe you thought this election would run around the economy. The economy is a big, big issue. But right now, it seems so much is turning on ceasefire. So much is turning on Gaza. Indeed, we were all horrified by the events of October 7th. But something funny happened on the way to the forum. The narrative changed on October 8th. For the first time, really, in our history, we started hearing the Palestinian story. People became curious about the Palestinians, and people started sympathizing and empathizing with the Palestinians. Something we've not seen, a march of 300,000 pro-Palestinian demonstrators were in Washington, D.C. Then you had a huge march of people who supported Israel, more than 100,000 people. And that was countered by 400,000 people who were standing in support of Palestine. 30,000 people have been killed in response to the actions of Hamas. Or is that really what it's about? Is it about the gas there, the $500 billion trove of gas and oil off of the coast of Gaza? Many people feel, as they dig down, that if you follow the money, that's where the treasure is. Indeed, some Israeli developers are looking at developing Gaza into a luxury beachfront community. So much is there to unpack. But a lot of people in America have a lot of feelings about this. And this is taking us back to, we have echoes of the Vietnam War. We're watching people self-immolate. We're seeing people set themselves on fire. And unlike in 1967, 1968, during the time of the Vietnam War, the corporate media are not talking about it at all. Airman Bushnell, an active duty Air Force member, went in front of just a few days ago, he went in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. in full regalia, wearing his uniform, and he was shouting, "Freeze Palestine." And then he brought a can, doused himself with a liquid, and set himself on fire. The security ran out of the Israeli embassy with their guns trained on him. When the first responders showed up, they said, "We don't need guns, we need fire extinguishers." They were calling him all kinds of epithets while they were trying to save this young man's life. He just passed away, 25 years of age, from Massachusetts. What drove him? Now we're hearing stories about, of course, typically mental illness and calls of distress. No, he was not mentally ill when he went into the Air Force. He saw something. He said, "I cannot stand by genocide. I will not be a part of this." That's what he said just before he killed himself. He said, "I'm not going to do that." So this is where I stand. Let's talk about that today, because there's a history of self-immolation, and we need to talk about that today. We're going to be joined by Sam Husseini, independent journalist. You remember when he was kicked out of the Trump-Putin press conference, ejected before it even began. He's such a troublemaker, but he's a brilliant independent journalist. Brilliant, brilliant, and you've seen his writings in so many places. We've got, of course, brilliant social scientist, one of the founders of Operation Push, National Action Network, the dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project, and he is a senior advisor to Dr. Cornel West in his presidential campaign. But we're going to start things off with you, Esha. I'm so excited that you're with us. Krishna Swami. She is a podcaster, a journalist. Everybody go to historically.net. historically.net, because she really digs down and gives us the history of self-immolation. I mean, this is not unique, and yet, Esha, no one is talking about it. I mean, several people have committed this act, trying to draw attention to what's happening in Gaza, but it's not getting
Actually, in December, a woman went to the Israeli consulate in Atlanta, and she draped herself in a Palestinian flag, the green, white, and red,
Yes.
and she set herself on fire. A security guard tried to put it out, but it seems like she succumbed to her injuries, and that did not make much headlines besides small blimps on local news. So it wasn't even that long ago, and another woman had tried it. I think the difference here between Aaron Bushnell's situation and this woman's situation is that she didn't live stream it, and Aaron Bushnell live streamed it for all of the internet to watch.
So what are we looking at here, if you will? I mean, the video itself is quite disturbing. Sam Husseini gives you a link to it in his Substack, and I think it's important for people who feel that they need to see it. I mean, I'm gonna tell you, when you watch it, it's a bell that you will never ever be able to unring. But you do see this young man as he walked into, if you will, walked into history. He just, and shouting free Palestine. I mean, wow, Esha, that's a lot.
Indeed. So if we want to look at history, I think a lot of the idea of self-immolation comes from Buddhist and Hindu philosophy, where the fire is seen as some kind of cleansing, something holy. And as I was researching this, I've noticed in many ancient Buddhist literature, people offered their bodies to fire as a sacrifice for the greater good of the community. So in one story, this man notices that this community is very hungry and douses and just jumps into a wood fire in order to be able to give food, because that's the only way he thinks he can give food to the community. And so it's seen as using your body in order to fight for your community. And that was the same sentiment echoed when in 1962, a Vietnamese monk doused himself on fire in order to protest South Vietnam's oppression of Buddhism, because the government there was strongly Catholic. But unfortunately, in US newspapers, his action and many that followed have always been reported as somebody who commits suicide, which is seen differently in Buddhist and Hindu philosophy, because suicide is trying to end your existence, but not making a sacrifice for your community, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Well, I think it does make sense. I mean, because sacrifice, Dwight McKee, is, I think that's just, as Christians, I think we understand that. As people of faith, I think all people of faith understand sacrifice. And this is the ultimate sacrifice. What do you think of his actions, and how does this resonate with you as someone who witnessed these kinds of sacrifices during the Vietnam War period?
Well, it's the ultimate sacrifice. It is another level of conviction. The Bible says, present yourself as a living sacrifice. And in that context for us, it means that you can put your life at risk for the sake of the greater principle. So whether or not you're threatened by Herod and being put on the cross, or threatened by the multitude being hung, or being hanged, that your obligation as a Christian is to allow yourself to be martyred for the greater cause. In Buddhism and Hinduism, it's even more personal than that. It is a situation where you sacrifice yourself and you inflict the damage on yourself because you're trying to make a bigger statement, a greater statement, to say that my life, I'm willing to give my life for the greater good, and and to put myself at risk for the sake of all humanity. And so you saw a lot of it at the beginning of the Vietnam War, where the Buddhist monks and the Hindu monks burned themselves alive because they saw the wasn't just, and they wanted to make a point. Uh, the soldier, bless his heart, apparently was so upset with what he experienced and the disconnection between what he thought he was joining and what he ended up being involved in was as such that his only form of protest, as he saw it, was to set himself ablaze and announce to the world that this is why I'm killing myself, because I'm stuck in this situation and refuse to be a part of genocide against my brother and my neighbor. And so rather than kill somebody else, I'm willing to kill myself for the greater good.
Is it of consequence that this is an active duty? He was an active duty member of the Air Force. I mean, this is not someone, I'm not saying that it would diminish his actions had he been retired, but this is someone who was on base, so to speak.
Well,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was saying I've spoken with some people who are veterans, are in the Air Force, and they say that yes, it makes a big difference because this is getting the Air Force to question a lot of their policies. Because in Air Force, a lot of enlisted men stay in close community quarters, and they have a very tight knit community. So this act affects many, many members of the Air Force, and it gets them talking and it gets them questioning. So this is something that definitely would have the DOD more worried than if a veteran did this.
So, I mean, so we're looking like maybe that's why Pat Tillman, as we remember from years ago, maybe that is why he was such a threat. He was on his way home to meet with Noam Chomsky, remember? Because when he got, I mean, this was an NFL player who left the NFL because in the wake of 9/11, his patriotism made him want to go and fight the enemy. And he got overseas and said, no, this is not what I thought it was. And Noam Chomsky, I want to see you when I get home. And lo and behold, he is killed by his fellow soldiers, friendly fire, as his brother was riding in the car right behind him. Wow, Dwight, come on.
No, it's a little suspect, and I think that trauma is, it's something that we are discussing. It's worth discussing, because what you find yourself, you go in pursuing justice, you go in pursuing truth, you go in believing that you are in for the right reason, doing the right things, and then you have an encounter with your own finitude, because you find out, well, no, this is not what he told me it was at all. I am on the wrong side of justice. I am killing innocent people for reasons that they told me were real, and I'm finding out those are not the reasons at all, that it has more about commerce and riches and resources than justice and democracy. And I find myself a tool of oppression rather than a fighter against oppression. And for a lot of people, it becomes an existential crisis and they can't handle it. And so they, resort either to drugs or to suicide or to, dysfunctionality, which is why so many of them are homeless. Many of them really have a hard time adjusting to the reality of what they were exposed to.
Well, let me read to you from Sam Husseini, who unfortunately is not going to be able to join us. He was with his family today, and he couldn't get a stable internet connection. But he tried to get on with us, as we all know, at the beginning of the show. But I want to read to you from what he wrote in his Substack, and I'm sure this is something Esha and Dwight you can relate to. Ignoring immolators lulls the society to sleep, he writes. Aaron Bushnell at the Israeli embassy, free Palestine. Aaron Bushnell, he wrote, identified himself in the live stream video as he walked toward the Israeli embassy as, quote, an active duty member of the U.S. Air Force, close quote, adding, quote, that I will no longer be complicit in genocide, close quote. He then lit himself ablaze and yelled, free Palestine, over and over. And he has now died. As he burned up, uniformed personnel screamed at him to get on the ground. One officer has a gun drawn on Aaron until after he collapses. That was one of the Israeli security. Finally, another officer, the first responder, said, I don't need guns, I need fire extinguishers, close quote. But prior to lighting himself ablaze, Aaron poured liquid from a metal bottle over his head and put on his military cap. He then took out a lighter and struggled to light it. He said calmly as he walked to the embassy, quote, I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal, close quote. Wow.
Yeah, and for me, the most appalling thing is how many newspapers covered it. One newspaper said the cause, his motives are unknown. When in this video, it is so clear what his motives are. And a lot of them have been saying maybe he's mentally ill. Time magazine even went on to explain how this violates the DOD rules on conduct for an enlisted person. So yeah, it's very powerful, and it's also very interesting to see how mainstream media has been trying to minimize, obfuscate, trying to bury the lead, in fact.
Dwight McKee? Because now they're making him mentally ill. Now they're saying he was raised in basically in a Christian cult.
Yes, but he hasn't spoken to his parents in a while. He's been estranged, according to Talia. I forgot her last name, but she's a journalist who's familiar with the family.
Well, it would have been interesting had it been an Israeli who would have burned himself in front of the Palestinian embassy. He, at that point, I think, would have been a hero. They'd be naming streets after him. They'd had a day of honor to honor him. And he would become a Christian, Jewish saint overnight, because the perception is so different between those who protest in behalf of Palestine and those who protest in behalf of Israel. And that's a media bias. And I think we've experienced it all the time, through and through.
So, so where do you see this going? Because these self-immolations, these acts of self-sacrifice, they're not being covered, but they are happening. And you're seeing it on X. In social media, they're being covered. How do you think that will impact people?
The fact that it is trending on X for over 24 hours shows that even if the media outlets don't cover it, people are deeply affected by it, and they're still talking about it because they're having strong emotions to it. It is very traumatic to watch. It's getting them to question, why did he do this? Why was it so important for him? And they are digging deeper and deeper, and I can see that it is deeply affecting them. And I've also seen the worldwide reaction. Like, for example, the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro offered condolences for his family. The Mexican president did. So it seems like he has gotten almost many people from all over the world to talk about this, because it is very unusual. He's a soldier in the US who supports Israel in every UN Security Council resolution. And for him to get to this point raises a lot of questions for people who may have been distant from it or detached from it.
Well, and also you also can contrast it between how Secretary of State was received, and he said, "I'm a Jew first as I deal with these negotiations, and then an American." Had that been reversed, and had been a Muslim or an Arab who would have been going to negotiate some, an Eric first and then an American, you would have seen him get Kanye. I mean, they would have taken him completely out the mix. Whereas Blatant, Bleakin, Blanken, whatever his name is, he said it with impunity. And it's inherently a conflict of state, a conflict of interest. If you're the head of the State Department and trying to negotiate, trying to secure a negotiation, and go in, saying I'm already on the side of the Israelis, that's my primary commitment is to Zionism.
Well, what do you make of this? I mean, I was reading Asal Rod, her Twitter feed, which is really fascinating. She's a PhD candidate. And she said, basically of Aaron Bushnell, why did he do it? Four major news outlets have almost the same exact headline for the self-immolation of this 25-year-old young man. Not one of them mentions Gaza, genocide, the reason for his protest, or the last words that he spoke, which were free Palestine.
For me, that's just the culmination of the entire history of how they covered this event. For example, New York Times regularly refers this to as Israel-Hamas war. One is a place, one is a group. And there's two problems with this. Even Israeli officials like Yoav Gallant, who's a defense minister, have said that his war is with Gaza. They're all guilty. He said that they are animals and we need to remove their food, shelter, water. And so that's a call for genocide. Netanyahu said that we are the children of light. They are the children of darkness. We need to push them, exterminate them from their earth, even their horses, sheep. And then an Israeli Knesset member has said that she is happy to see the destruction of Gaza. When you put these three together, it shows you that Israel is not targeting just Hamas militants where there are a few thousand, but they are waging the war against the majority of the unarmed population. And there have been no coverage of these quotes by Israeli officials to show genocidal intent or anything like that. So the idea of Israel committing genocide instead of it getting, I don't know, trying to get rid of extremist militants is met with scorn throughout mainstream media. That's the first thing. And it's the same way here with Aaron Bushnell, where he said, I cannot be complicit in genocide anymore. And they cannot bother to quote him. And they're saying his motives are unknown.
How can they say that his motives are unknown when everyone who was there when he live streamed it and he shouted free Palestine? I mean, that to me is irresponsible journalism, Esha. That's not even journalism. What is that?
That is covering for propaganda. They are trying to minimize this because they don't want people to investigate how is this man complicit in genocide. They don't want people to investigate why is he screaming free Palestine? Why is Palestine not free? How are they being oppressed? And once they investigate this, people don't like it. For example, in Gaza, in the West Bank, there are roads that Palestinians cannot go through. So if there's a hospital, ambulances have to wait for an hour or more for Israeli guards to come and check and then send them, where many people die. There's two different court systems. Palestinians get the military court, which is harsh, unjust. Israelis get civilian court. So when an Israeli settler goes and kills a bunch of Palestinians, it's a slap on the wrist, because often they're just labeled as terrorists. They take the Israeli settlers' word, regardless of how much they can't be a terrorist, like if they're paralyzed or whatever. With Palestinians, it's the opposite. Even when they don't commit actions, I mean, once something happened or an accident and it caused the one Israeli police officer to shoot another one, and they still charged a Palestinian kid with murder. So things like this show that there is an unequal system and how Palestinians are systematically oppressed by an occupying force, and they don't want people to investigate it. Hence, they're trying to hide all this so that people don't ask further questions.
Dwight, what do you make of that? I mean, it is so irresponsible. This young man shouted free Palestine. Those were the last words that he shouted. But no reporting.
No, it's not irresponsible because it's very intentional. I mean, it's not as if they are not clear on what they're doing and what the motives are. And the motives are to minimize the impact of a man giving his life for a cause he believes in, and examination of that cause to see if it's a sacred cause or a non-sacred cause. So rather than, as the sister said, rather than take it there, they just say that he killed himself. Nobody knows why. Because once you say nobody knows why, then you don't have to examine the layers of what was this really about, and what did he really find out, and what led him to the conclusion that his life was worth that level of sacrifice. So it's very, very strategic, very, very intentional.
What do you think? I mean, I assume that he went into the military, went into the Air Force, full of high ideals, as so many people do. And because so many people come out of the military committing these acts of desperation, suffer from what Matthew Ho calls moral injury. They've been taught to kill, which goes against everything that you were taught to do growing up, right? So you've been desensitized to that. But for him to say, I will no longer be complicit in genocide, that to me is more systematic. That's more systematized, White and Esha. That he's not just taking the view from the ground. He's taking the view, it's not just he's down in the forest, but he went above the forest and looked at the trees and said, no, there's something rotten here. And I think it was more of an indictment of the system that he represents. Are we afraid to ask that question? Are all of us afraid to ask that question? Esha?
I would say yes. And also, there's also a more personal issue in that the Biden administration has deployed some people in the Air Force to help with targeting and striking for Israel. And that includes software engineers like Airman, Bushnell, and hardware engineers and things like that. So there is definitely a very personal aspect of that. And he may have been working on a project that was helping the targeting and striking missions. And of course, there is also the general aspect of the U.S. government, a government that he has been sworn to protect, that keeps offering unconditional support and aid in every possible way for Israel. It shields Israel from the UN consequences for their actions for the past 40 longer years. So I think he was looking at both the personal tasks of the Air Force and the overall role of the US government in propping up the Israeli government. And the Israeli government's policies are not new. It's been this, Gaza has been under blockade since 2005. And there have been reports that parts of Gaza have become uninhabitable because there's a lack of water and other resources. And Israel has been moving settlers into West Bank by the hundreds of thousands.
Mm-hmm.
And they have and in fact, a lot of these settlers are Americans who move from America to Israel and then decide to occupy Palestinian land. So there is such a confluence between America and Israel that it is very natural for him to think, both as an American, as a member of military, that there are many levels of complicity in what is going on in Israel and Gaza right now.
Dwight, your thoughts?
Same. I think that plus the fact, that they are flying drones from out of Colorado and bombing innocent people. Uh, they are, she said, using sophisticated technology, which he may have been a part of, and to just a general conclusion that a country that you believed in and a people that you sought to give your life for is not who you thought they were. It would be no different it would be different, but an example would be if a child came home and found his mother in bed with his minister, you know, and he would be in shell shock because two of the people he believed most in were not who he thought they were. And so he would have a double dose of trauma and a rude reality check. So who does he confide in? Who does he talk to? His mother has disappointed him because she is hypocritical, but he can't go to his pastor or any pastors because he no longer trusts them. And so I think that's what the brother kind of experienced was confrontation with a reality that he just could not handle.
Do you think that there could be more people in our military who are questioning what they're seeing, what they're doing? We're seeing drone operators who are leaving, who are saying, I can't do this. This is not a video game. I'm actually killing.
I think there are thousands. I say you see the same thing in what's the young kid who ended up sending the classified information out that got put in jail. Chelsea Manning.
Yeah, yes, she did.
I see. You see that. I think you see that in hundreds of thousands, thousands of troops.
Snowden, who was CIA.
Yeah, who's CIA? Ellsberg, who was Pentagon. I think that once you confront that reality, it challenges you to either respond to it and take the hit for having to respond, or escape from it, which explains why you have so many soldiers on drugs, or so many soldiers are suicidal, or so many soldiers that are locked up because they've had nervous breakdowns. It's an encounter with a reality that most people are not prepared to deal with.
I mean, is the Department of Defense, are they prepared? I mean, do they know what they're dealing with this kind of crisis? Because I would look at an Aaron Bushnell, Dwight, and Esha, and if I were in DOD, given the fact that these people are connected to families, I mean, these are not folks who are just out here. These are people who come from the United States, and they've got feelings too. They've got thoughts too. They see things that make them go, I don't know about what I'm looking at. He can't be the only one, Esha.
No, I don't think he's the only one. It really depends on how they end up expressing it. Some people will finish their contract and then leave, but other people will definitely have a hard time. And I was reading about what they did in the Vietnam War to help cope with the atrocities they did, and they had actually hired the army actually created brothels and hired women in order to make people forget about the realities on the ground. And so I have a very cynical view of the national security apparatus in the U.S. I don't see them particularly caring for each soldier as an individual. For them, it's more important that they kind of obey orders and do whatever they're asked, because the way the U.S. enters into almost any war I can remember has not been for holy motives. It's been based on lies and based on furthering capitalistic interests for people who the government, who have been donors or other kind of servants to the government, who use the government for their own private purposes.
Well, many of us don't know that that happened during the Vietnam War. And I think many of us have forgotten, or we certainly were not conscious or were not born when these acts of self-sacrifice were occurring. What is it about this conflict, Esha, that's inspiring what we saw during the Vietnam War? These acts of self-immolation. I mean, because they're numerous now.
Probably the fact that it is genocide. I mean, it is. South Africa made a very compelling case, um, and the ICJ ruled that there is evidence. And then when you see the fact that even Israeli government officials are calling openly for this, it is a big responsibility because people have been taught that genocide is the red line and never again. What will you do if like there's another world war? Like, and so I think the fact that they see this genocide unfolding and that it is such a big thing to grapple with, and also there's not much they can do because the US government, there have been studies that show that public policy has very little impact, public opinion has very little impact on public policy. So it is not being able to create a concerted effort like in the civil rights movement in order to change the policy, not being able to, being alienated. They just don't know how to express dissent or how to create a new reality. And so this seems like the screams of the powerless and the desperate.
What were the monks looking to do during, I mean, you've done so much work on that, so much research on that. What were they looking to convey as
They
they were sacrificing themselves, as they were burning themselves to death?
Well, they were trying to galvanize the people within South Vietnam to fight the South Vietnamese government, which is basically a puppet government installed by the US and France. So it was meant to show the seriousness, and South Vietnam had a huge rural population that were religious and understood that if a respected individual like a monk saw something so serious, we need to take action. And so that was the first purpose, was to just galvanize the people. And the country was divided in two. So they really opposed that balkanization of their country because they said, we are Vietnamese, we are one people, we need to be together. And so it was once again to galvanize many South Vietnamese into fighting against their own government in order to unite again as one country. So that was what their purpose was. And it was more effective because there are different cultural messages, like having a monk who is a very highly respected individual in these communities doing this. It conveys how serious the matter is and how urgent it is and how much they need to work and give this their full attention.
Dwight, what impact did these acts have during the Vietnam War?
Tremendous impact. I mean, because it made you question your own convictions and your own commitment to your convictions. Is that if you see somebody willing to light themselves a fire for a cause, you have to think, now, what am I willing to sacrifice for what I believe in? You know?
Mhm.
And so if you see a monk set ablaze for his convictions, then going to jail is not that big an option. Or becoming a
Conscientious.
conscientious objective, moving to Canada is not a huge sacrifice, you know. So it opens up your options and for your commitment and your demonstration of conscience. So
So
it had a
let's
tremendous impact.
so let's go back to this active service Air Force member. First you, Dwight, then you, Esha. how could this impact the American public?
I think
I mean, wait
profoundly.
a minute, Dwight. If you told his story,
If
because
you told the story, I think
the corporate media are not telling his story. They're not saying he talked about free Palestine. Now they're making him mentally ill. He was a member of a cult. He had, and he had all these problems. That's why he did that. And he was very calm and very sane. And it was very clear that he had prayed about this and that he had thought this through. And he was very deliberate in his actions, Dwight.
I think it can have a profound influence. One is it infers value, the value of the people that's being oppressed.
Hmm.
And what is the media has tried to do, and the Zionists tried to do, is to devalue the people that they're mobbing, to call them animals, to call them vermin, whatever names they want to give for them. The first issue for them is to devalue these people. So these are really not innocent people that you're killing. These are, terrorists. These are wretched. Yeah, these are animals. And so you devalue them. But when somebody comes along and say these people are worth me dying for, it enhances their intrinsic value. It's not unlike Jesus dying on the cross gives us value. And so, for God so loved the world, that's why that's such a powerful scripture, that he gave his only begotten son, that the sacrifice of Jesus infers value. And so I think it'd have a tremendous impact for those who really study this thing and understand what his motivation was. And what they will probably do, many people will research into his Christian faith and what tradition he comes out of and the values of that faith. And they will be challenged by that faith to either study it or join it. And so, I think it can have a tremendous impact.
Asher, do you think this will have a tremendous impact?
It will have some impact. I'm still trying to grapple with it. What I see right now, just in social media and among some people, is that it's caused them to stop and just think and ask a lot of questions. And of course, the deeper you dive into the Israel-Palestine situation, the harder it becomes to stomach status quo. And Israeli government is actually worried about a lot of the younger generation American Jews have grown up with the internet, and they have access to what happened during the Nakba, what happened in '67, and they're not supporting Israel the same way their parents were because of this information. And so status quo will become harder for people to stomach. But does that mean it will result in an organized effort like the civil rights movement in the 1960s or other movements such as the unemployment rights movement in the 1930s in order to create sustainable change? Will there be organizations that can mobilize the masses to cause the US government to change its policies? That is what I'm a little unsure about, because that hasn't happened in a while.
But do you think that the time, Dwight, is that there's something in the zeitgeist? It seems that people are moving. I mean, there does seem to be a heightened level of consciousness and conscientiousness. It seems that people are less willing to, we can look at the Listen to Michigan campaign, we can see it, and we can see how the Democrats and Republicans have, and particularly Democrats, pushed to get one candidate to the exclusion of everybody else. But
I think
working.
I think the convention is going to be the function at the junction. I think everybody's going to be there, and you'll find all of these different groups, despairing groups, whether it's the young Black activists, whether it's the young Jewish activists, whether it's the old liberals, whether it's the Israelis. I think we'll find a common denominator at the convention. and everybody's convened there in protest there. And so I think to that extent, it's going to absolutely affect policy because it's going to disrupt the convention and it's going to create, it's going to disassemble the illusion of unity that these Democrats are trying to set up. As if everything is all right. Once you turn over that rock and find out somebody's rotten in Denmark, I think that it's going to be a feeding frenzy. That a lot of the hypocrisy is going to be exposed at one level or another, and they will start looking at who's getting paid, who's getting the money, who's in cahoots with the lies, where's the propaganda coming from, how much media is unbiased and how much is biased. And I think it really opens up the gates to the Republicans that if they see it as an opportunity to unveil to uncover the rest of the dirt, and they'll put their investigators and their researchers and their media on it, and they'll see it as used as a feeding frenzy. So yeah, I just think it's just the beginning of the process.
That's going to be interesting because a lot of the corporate media organizations are not sending their local teams to Chicago. They're saying it's too expensive because it is cost prohibitive for a lot of even big markets to send a team to Chicago because the DNC is charging so much money to be on site.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, what do you think is going to happen there? I mean, it seems like there's going to be more activity outside Dwight and Esha than inside, because the convention really has become a television show, really.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that, yes, outside there will be a lot of activities. Yes, I've seen the costs of access into the convention. It can go over like 30, 40, 50,000 for even like the smallest organizations. So I think they've done that on purpose after the 1968 events, in order to make the convention more dreary and more clinical, and not a place where the presidential candidate actually gets decided. Instead, making it into kind of a mindless ceremony. But outside the convention, it will be hard for them. Even today, I looked at Biden trying to get into the Rockefeller Center, and Jewish Voices for Peace were yelling, "Free Palestine, end aid to Israel." And so it seems like it's going to be hard for the Democrats to maintain that show and that idea of respectability when there are protesters right outside by the hundreds of thousands trying to explaining how the Democratic Party's been complicit in this whole thing.
With 200,000 cell phones, for the record.
Good point.
That's what's going to make it difficult for them to contain. You're going to have 200,000 cell phones out there, and they'll be recording everything and doing a commentary on everything that they record.
Well, what if they decide to black everybody's cell phones out? I have to be prepared for that too.
They have to black. They don't let they'd have to blacken their own cell phones out. And they can't function that way.
Good point.
Once you put a blanket over the internet, it's a blanket for everybody, and so they won't be able to call home from the podium.
Oh, or Biden with his minders to help him
navigate.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So they that's not an option.
So I mean, well, I've just got a couple more minutes here. I mean, Esha, you're working on a big story that will be coming out. I'm going to have you back in a couple days to talk about a New York Times reporter who has a rather disturbing background. I got about 90 seconds for you.
Yes, it's a story that was peddled as one of the atrocity propagandas that New York Times does, like the Iraqi, the lie about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction or the Gaddafi's mass rape. This was about basically that Hamas using rape as a weapon of war on October 7th. And once you realize she had no previous journalistic experience, she was a filmmaker who peddled basically Israeli propaganda. And what's more shocking is that she had posted some kind of idea of how they needed to for the Western audience, they need to turn Hamas into ISIS because a Western audience is scared of ISIS. And so then she actually solicited interviews to say, hey, can you interview with me because I want to help with Israeli advocacy? And that is against every kind of journalistic ethics and methodology to do that. And so then she came out with a sloppy article that is easily debunked. The witnesses are, some of them are IDF agents, people who have a vested interest in pushing one narrative. And a lot of the stories are unverifiable, have holes in it. The one lady who she claimed was raped, her account, like the police officer says that they don't think she was raped, and also her family disputes this. So it's full of story holes. And the most shocking thing is that these hiring practice, like how on earth did they let this person get hired? Because Palestinian journalists have been fired for less. Like this one person said that she was asked to write a hit piece about herself before she got hired because she was Palestinian, and then she refused. So it just shows you the differential standards. And to say that maybe the fact that New York Times is consistently on Israel is not an accidental, careless bias, but a design.
Well, you know, I mean, I think everything, we're in a time of change, everybody. Dwight McKee, Esha, I cannot wait to have you back to talk in more depth about this story about Anat Schwartz. And I have to think of Hank Schwab, who sat on the front row, Dwight McKee. You remember him at Rainbow Push every week, a Holocaust survivor. And we had the occasion to ask him, Jonathan, my brother, who's in Congress now, asked him first, why do you come here every week? I mean, he beat almost everybody to push on Saturday. He said, because I survived the Holocaust. And when I came here and saw what was happening to African Americans, I said, this is my fight too. And this is our fight. This is a fight for the human family. It's a fight for our very survival, not just physically, but morally, for spiritually. And we have got to win, everybody. May God bless you, Esha. Historically.com.
.net.
.net.
I can't afford the .com yet.
Oh, no, that's all right. It's all right. Historically.net. And that's historicly.net.
Yep.
I want you to go on and support her. Esha Krishnaswamy, thank you for the work that you do. Dwight McKee, thank you for the brilliant work that you do. Everybody, I'll see you tomorrow on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. May God bless you. Have a great one.
Nice meeting you, Ezra. In Exodus as well as you to look at as well.
I will absolutely look at it right now.